All right, so let's talk about the pineal gland. It's a small little gland inside of your brain in its central cortex, and it's there and it regulates your sleep patterns. It's a pretty amazing thing, but what also is amazing, whenever you look into ancient cultures, you'll find that they knew this all along and it had associations, and I'll try to give you a few of those if we can. So this little pineal gland that's there kind of looks like a little pine cone. Like if you ever seen the little baby pine cones that start on things, on pine trees and so on, that's pretty much what it looks like. And that's where it's got its name from actually, which would go back to the Greeks. But it was known about even before that. Now this regulates the hormone melatonin, and this regulates your sleep patterns and things too. And of course, sleep is something that's real strange about humans and people, and why you've got to go through this sleep cycle and so on. But it shows connections with that type of sleep cycle, and of course in the ancient world, a lot of esoteric things were in dreams and in the other worlds and so on there too. So there are connections that attach that to it. But a lot of animals seem to have this attachment to them, and then we've got one that's been real enhanced. And the Morale School of Medicine looked at this and they said, well, that melatonin, it regulates your sleep, but it also regulates your blood pressure and resistance to insulin and so on. So it become pretty important to people that have those issues, I'm sure. But if we look back in time, Rene Descartes, he was the first person to have actually come out and said something about this, and he said that that was your third eye, or that was actually a place for your soul. Now, during this time, we were, of course, trying to distance ourselves from the ideas inside the Bible and all of that type thing. But the one thing that we couldn't distance ourselves from was the fact that we wanted to have a soul and something that lives on after ourselves. And so it still was connected to that in this type of idea. Now, of course, with doing cloning projects and all kinds of things that have come on, people have realized that that doesn't have a true connection to it. Well, what does it have a true connection to? You see, because in the ancient times, like is shown right here in ancient Rome, there is a huge pine cone showing you this knowledge that's attached to it, and it's flanked on either side by two peacocks, which again have this same type of connection, for that was a bird like the phoenix. And this hooks up to an idea of rebirth and so on. Now, pine cones, and we are probably witnessing it right now in this time of year, where all the trees are changing colors. We're reaching into Christmas time here, and all of a sudden all the trees are changing colors, pulling off yellows, oranges, and browns, and then the trees drop all their leaves. But the pine tree doesn't drop its leaves. It stays going on. It's the reason it was always called an evergreen tree. But there are connections to this that go back even much farther than Rome, when people wonder about this. But this is found right there in Rome and Vatican cities that are there. And you can even find it attached to Pope staffs and so on. There's an even better one than this that shows one on top that you can tell is straight a pine cone that's there. You can look into ancient medical manuals that people have made back in the day, and they show a connection to that. There's that same pine tree and same pine cone. And this hooks up to the mind. It's looked at as being the third eye because it's like a conjunctive. And while it doesn't really detect light in the way that we think of with a eyeball, letting light into our mind, it actually does it different and is able to actually detect if there's light going on or not. Again, this regulates your sleep cycle, so it's not that big of a deal, but yet whenever we're born, whenever our egg is fertilized and so on, melatonin is attached to this point too. So it has something to do with rebirth in that situation. Now, this is not to be confused with melanin, which is what makes your skin get more dark or whatever off of it. It doesn't have anything to do with it, although it sounds kind of like it. And of course, a lot of the medicines that you'll get for sleep aids and so on have this malefic, mela type situation. And that has to do with regulating your sleep cycles. And again, you don't see light through it like that. It would be almost like saying if you closed your eyes, but then look at the sun and wave your hands in front of it, you still get this type of visual that you can tell you're being crossed over or something's happening. And this third eye is found inside of lizards. Chameleons and geckos and so on have this little crystallus area on their head which allows light into their brain, and on them it is somewhat of a detector device if something's over the top of them. It's why they know that there's something right over the top of them, like a bird coming down and things like that, is that they can detect it somewhat. And of course, we're right near Christmas time, so we can talk about this and how pine hooks up to the idea of Christmas and rebirth on the solstice. But people have found even ancient Scythian with tattoos and so on, and they have these bugs on them and so on, and hopefully you can understand the iconography of a griffin here. A griffin is really a lion that's attached with an eagle, and it's much like the Sphinx or so on. There's also manticores and other creatures, which are really the four cardinal points of the ancient zodiac, if you look into it. And they even call this the pine apple in some cases, although we know exactly what a pineapple is. It's because of its appearance looking like a pine cone and then tasting a lot more like an apple that name was taken on to it, because it was before known as a pine fruit. And just like you hear about grains and everything is referred to as a corn, like einkorn wheat and so on like that, they thought of fruits as apples. So this thing goes back to the ancient Scythians and the way back machine, and it really has nothing to do with Christianity. In the 1st century AD, that thing that we're looking at there was Publius Cinctus had made this, and his name's right there on a statue. So that shows you that they had that. But there are a lot of ancient Greek drawings and writings showing this pineapples that are there, even ceremonies done with such. So there's a lot of connections to it, but with the Christians, they didn't do anything like that. They would put cloves in them and moisten them up, and when they dry, they would open up and release a smell. There's still a thing done today where people take oranges and do things like this also, but that's not the ancient connection. You see, if you've seen it in my videos on sacred geometry, you'll notice that pattern of it going down and around right there is also based on sacred geometry. It's a Fibonacci type sequence. In fact, this is one of the main things that they'll show you, along with the yucca plants, certain cactuses, all this other stuff, where they're all forming that goes from the smallest all the way up to the largest, because galaxies are formed under this same concept and this same guise and this wheel and this measurement that's there. But how far do they go back? Well, they go definitely farther back than that. The ancient Sumerians have a lot of statues they're showing from at least 5,500 years ago, 3,500 BC, that they had this. In the times of Gilgamesh and all that with the Sumerians, with their gods known as the Anunnaki. And you can see here that these gods that are the Anunnaki have these pine cones. And they're utilizing them with the tree of life. This is another thing that you should be familiar with out of the Bible. And they're utilizing that in a certain situation. They also quite often are holding that handbag whenever it does that. And it is the fertility of the earth. So these Sumerians really had a lot going on. And a lot more connections than people are willing to give credit to. If you read about them in school, they'll tell you they started farming and this, that, and the other, but they don't let you know that they had advanced math, trigonometry, developed our first writing, which is cuneiform, and really quite difficult. Although everybody in the Fertile Crescent and the ancient Egyptians used it, it was the lingua franca for quite some period of time until the Phoenicians came up with phonetic type writing that we use today. And that came about due to people wanting to etch into stone instead of having a large conglomerate, because the reason that the tablets were made in cuneiform writing is because of pushing wedge shapes. That's what cuneiform means, into tablets and so on. Once we start scratching on rocks and doing things, we need real more angular letters and so on, and that hooks up with the ancient Phoenicians. But as far as a pine gland and all these things, there are people, and I've seen lots of videos where they say these Anunnaki and they came from outer space and so on. Well, in the Sumerian tales, that's what they say. They are people from the netherworld. There are people from the heavens and the underworld. It's where we got that concept from in the first place. And because there's no writing trapping it before this date, we can only try to look back and profess that they probably had this belief going on a long time before, perhaps as old as Göbekli Tepe, or maybe quite longer. And this is only a certain demographic of the population on Earth, because everything wasn't in uniform with each other in any way, shape, or form, and it's still not to this day, where some people are spacemen, computerized people in a modern world, and as modern and as advanced as they are, and then there are still people that have primitives left on this world that are almost in the pre-Neolithic state. These ancient ceremonies of the Druids were hooked up to this. The people of Catalhoyuk were hooked up to it, so on. And it's one way they've been able to say that those are the people that ended up becoming the Sumerians, because they have some things that are showing in the Sumerians that are showing from those ancient cultures. Was it just them? Did they split up in more than one place, more than one way? It sure looks like it. And whenever you look at genetics, it kind of shows you that, yeah, that happened also. So these ancient Anunnaki that people talk about as being aliens and are said to have gave us different ideas also have stories. The Sumerians have an ancient story of Inanna. Whenever she's coming of age and looking for a husband and so on, she has to eat pine nuts. It's something that was sacred to them. Most people don't know, and we're right at Christmas time now, but most people don't know that they used to have sacred trees, evergreen trees in a sacred grove. They would single out a tree. They would put presents under it and so on, and this was supposedly for Dumuzi. And if you look into Inanna and Dumuzi, it mimics a lot of what is in Jesus, this dying and resurrecting God, but it also has to do with the mysteries of springtime and how we all come back around in her, and then him and her have to switch back and forth like yin and yang, giving us the seasons that we have. And whenever she goes away, everything dies off, and he goes and gets her. And when she comes back, wherever she walks across the earth, the plants all come back. So this ancient pine cone has a lot of connections to it, a lot of things that people aren't really told in modern and in ancient times, connected to all kinds of people here. And it shows you something that's part of the power plant of our mind. If you think of your mind as being something like the computer that you have there, you have a math coprocessor and all these different things hooked up to do certain things. And the pineal gland is one of those that does certain things that we know nowadays as far as regulating sleep. And it even helps with insulin and things like that, I said before. But there are other connections too with it that the ancients knew, because of all this sacred geometry hooking all up together. So when a woman came of age, she would start eating pine nuts. Do pine nuts have extra estrogen in them or something? Does it do anything like that? There's a lot of plants on this earth that can be checked into. One that we're finding great depths in is cannabis now to modern day, and talking about using mushrooms for certain things. And it's really becoming enlightening, no pun on the words intended. So apparently this has a lot more to do with things than we're led to believe. Whenever you look into it, just like most other things that I talk about on the channel, it goes back much earlier than people still give credit for. They try to say it goes back to this one guy and so on, and his discoveries about it, and then you come to find out There's these ancient mythologies that go with that concept, and dreams and all this going on, and rebirth, and situations hooked up with this sacred pine cone. It's even in the Vatican. Some of these things are right in front of you and you never actually see them until someone points them out for you and then gives you an explanation. Let me know what you think down below. We'll get on to another one. Peace.